our continued study of deeper roots, we recognize the fact that today, more than any other time in the last few years, it is crucial for Muslims to really begin to understand where we have come from and where we are going. And in 2015, with the changes in the world and big events happening, a lot of pressure is being applied to Muslims. And in many of the Western countries, Muslims feel as though they're not really a part of the country. And so this is where the study of history itself, the study of deeper roots, gives us a background of our presence in the Western world and all different parts of the world. It helps to raise our esteem, and it helps to develop a better understanding of where we are actually now and what potential we have for the future. And so when looking at deeper roots, and the essence of the study itself is to map and to follow Muslims across the Atlantic, coming into the Americas. This is the essence of the subject. We looked at a wave of Muslims who came before Columbus. And we recognize the fact that to say that, to even make the statement that people came before Columbus is really a challenge to the educational systems and the curriculums and everything that we know here as a civilization. But in looking critically at Christopher Columbus, we recognize that he wasn't the first European to come across. He wasn't the first person to come across, because there were millions of people living here before Columbus's time. We also recognize there were great civilizations, and Muslims actually participated in these civilizations. Muslims were part of the landmass, or part of the populations, especially in Central America and South America, and there are even reports of North America itself. And so the next wave that comes out before, first there is before Columbus, pre-Columbus, then there is during the time of Columbus himself. So during the time when the Spanish and the Portuguese were coming across, there were actually Muslims involved in that movement. Now, in order to understand that, we need to first understand about the presence of Muslims in Spain and Portugal itself. And this also is a subject which needs to have a whole set of sessions, and inshallah in the future we can go more deeply into this. But to give you an overview of the presence of Muslims in Portugal and Spain, we need to go back to the early spread of Islam. When we look at the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, after the Arafat sermon, when the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, "Those who are present should take this message to all those who are absent." In other words, the rest of humanity. And so the Muslims went out. And within 100 years, Muslims had reached the far ends of the earth, of the known earth. They had gone to China, way up north into the high steppes of Russia. And as you see on your map, all the way across, and that green color on the maps that you have is actually the presence of Islam in that early phase. And so they moved all the way across to the Atlantic Ocean. And the great Tabi'i Uqba ibn Nafi', rahimahullah, rode his horse right into the Atlantic Ocean and said that if I knew there was land across you, I would take this message. I'll continue. And so they had reached all the way over on the western side to the Atlantic. And following this, a consolidation happened. And so the lands of North Africa, being under the rule of the Muslims, slightly high, being under the rule of the Muslims, there's feedback. The northern African region. This is what you could call the western area of Islam, known as Al-Maghrib, right, the western side. Its capital was, as we found, the city of Qayrawan, which is in present-day Tunis or Tunisia. And so in that capital there, in that region, the Muslims had a base of operations not only politically, but also religiously, socially, spiritually. It was the base of the Maliki madhab. Imam Malik's teachings, rahimahullah, the great Sahnun, put together Al-Mudawwana Al-Kubra. These are the major writings and teachings of Imam Malik, the Imam of Dar al-Hijrah. And he was the first scholar to put together an authentic book of hadith. His book, Al-Muwatta, the Al-Muwatta of Imam Malik, was the first authentic book of hadith before Bukhari, before Muslim, before any of the great books, the 6 great sunan that we know of. Al-Muwatta was actually the base for Islamic thinking. And in Qayrawan itself, a great leader was sent in order to consolidate the rule of the Muslims in North Africa. His name was Musa bin Nusayr, rahimahullah. His father, Nusayr, was a Christian bishop. He was studying to be a bishop in the Roman lands of Syria. When the Muslims went north after the Romans had attacked, the Muslims responded to the attack and they defeated the Romans, took over their territory, and many of their people became prisoners of war. This person, Nusayr, was given as a prisoner to be a servant to Khalid ibn Walid, rahimahullah, who was one of the great leaders of Islam. He noticed the intelligence in this man, and he freed him and made him his right-hand man. So Nusayr grew up or developed with the teachings of Khalid ibn Walid. His son Musa then is Musa bin Nusayr. So this is how his family is. And because of being with the leadership, the son was trained with the Umayyad leaders of Banu Umayyah, who were controlling the Muslim world. And his son became a very important leader for the Muslim armies. But there was something special about Musa bin Nusayr. Because his father had originally been a Christian, he had a sensitivity for other religions. And he had a way about him where he was concerned about people who were not necessarily Muslims who were living in Muslim lands. So he was the perfect person to send there to North Africa. And Musa rahimahullah opened up the doors to the Amazigh people that you know as Berber, people, the Amazigh, who are the original inhabitants of North Africa. Musa opened up the doors to them, and they accepted Islam in large numbers. And so across the straits in what is now Portugal and Spain, this is what is called the Iberian Peninsula. And the Iberian Peninsula was and still is a very strategic place in the map of the world. It is the mouth of the Mediterranean leading into the Atlantic. It is also a very fertile land, and so from early times, people from different countries would go to the Iberian Peninsula. The basic inhabitants of the land were called the Vandals, and Vandals were a Gothic people who believed in one God, very strong-willed people, and it was the Vandals who actually were part of the group that destroyed the Romans. And it's interesting because if you say the word Vandal today, if you say Ali's house was vandalized last night, do you know what that means? What does it mean? Yeah, destroyed, robbed, ruined. It's the name of a people, the Vandals. But if you say vandalism, that means robbery and destruction, right? That's how the Romans looked at them. So they're very powerful people who would stand for their rights. And they are the basic inhabitants of the land. And so from Vandal comes the word Vandalusia, and from there comes Andalusia, which was completely Arabicized to say Al-Andalus, Al-Andalus, the land of the Vandals. Okay, so this is where the name comes from. They were believers in one God. And also from ancient times, from around the 5th century BC or so, when Nebuchadnezzar sacked Jerusalem, many of the Jewish tribes fled into the lands. Some of the Jewish tribes actually went to the Iberian Peninsula. So they have a long history in that region as well. So it was a sanctuary for believers in one God, so to speak. And following this, with the dictates of the Roman Church, the Visigoths, another Gothic people representing the Romans. And at that time, as we have mentioned, the Romans were Trinitarians. It was established in a great conference in 325 AD in Nicaea with their leader Constantine. Right? They established the belief in Trinity. That's where they put their Bible together too. And so they enforced the Trinity on all those people who believed in one God. So anybody who believed in one God, whether you're a Christian who believed in one God, whether you're Jewish, and then later Muslim, became an enemy of the state. And so they enforced their tyranny and oppression upon the people, and they were crying for help. Musa, rahimahullah, was busy consolidating North Africa. And this is how he saw himself. And he didn't really want to take chances until, by the will of Allah, and this is a long story, I'm going to abbreviate it for you. By the will of Allah, one of the Christian leaders underneath Musa. Now remember this concept. There is an area in Morocco, it's the tip right there, the tip where Gibraltar, where Morocco touches Spain. On the southern side, it's called Ceuta. Or in Arabic, they say Sebta. And this is an area which was controlled by the Christians. There's a mountain that sort of separates it. But the Muslims reached there, and the Christians, very wisely, they said, we submit. And so we will live under the Muslims. We pay jizya. Because remember, the jizya tax is less than zakat. It's a reasonable tax that people pay, just like we pay income tax. And so the jizya was paid, and Sebta or Ceuta became part of the Islamic Empire. Ilian sent his daughter to the city of Toledo in Spain to be educated. It was a very high area of education, the former capital of the Iberian Peninsula. And the leader of the Visigoths, whose name was Roderick, the leader of the Visigoths, when he found out who she was exceedingly beautiful, and he violated her, he raped her. And when Ilian heard this, he wanted revenge. So he went to Musa bin Nusayr. Musa was not sure about Ilian. He said, let me see how serious you are. Ilian sent boats across, attacked the mainland, and returned. And he said to Musa, I will provide you boats and a way to get across the straits here, because the water can be rough in these straits. And so first, a small group led by a person named Tarifa, rahimahullah, went across, and then finally, the main general of Musa bin Nusayr, whose name was Tariq ibn Ziyad, rahimahullah. Tariq went across in 711. He was a Berber man of Amazigh people, great leader, very strong, determined. He went across, landed on the shores, and he met the forces of the Visigoths there in a great battle. Inshallah, in the future we can have a deeper, long series of sessions about this. But he landed on the shores, and the place where he landed, they called it Jabal Tariq, right? The mountain of Tariq. That's a picture of it. Very famous place. So Jabal Tariq from Arabic becomes Gibraltar. See how the name changes? And so they say, there was an old saying, in America where they would say, this house is as strong as the rock of Gibraltar. Okay, when you say something is as strong as that rock, because this is a powerful symbol of strength right at the mouth of the Atlantic Ocean. The shahid here, our witness, is that Tariq rahimahullah, with a force that was first 12,000 and then he got some extra troops, and close to 20,000, 19, 20,000. He met a force of 100,000. And the Muslims at that time were very strong. They believed in Allah. They had a different mindset than today. And so for Muslims in those times, 20,000 to 10,000 to 100,000 was about even. It was about even. And they went forward, and there's a wrong report that Tariq burnt the boats in back of him. Many of you may have heard this story. Actually, Islamic historians are going over this and found there's no report that he burnt the boats. Why would you burn the boats in back of you? That's a strategic retreat. Okay, because they want to make him like a suicide bomber or something. Okay, that's not what he did. What he did was he inspired them with the concepts of striving in Islam and with Jannah for those who would die in the path of Allah. And he led by his example. And so they went forward, they defeated the Visigoths completely. It was one of the greatest victories in the history of Islam. And it happened actually in Ramadan. In the last 10 nights in Ramadan is when it happened. It happened in the last 10 nights in Ramadan. Okay? And so Tariq rahimahullah was victorious, and he went forward after defeating the Visigoth army, and he continued to go north. Musa then came across later, the next year, met up with Tariq, and the two of them together went through the whole of Spain and Portugal. When the people heard about the Muslims, because Muslims were not punishing people, they were not putting taxes on people, they did not force people to accept Islam. You could continue to be a Christian or a Jew, right? You live in peace in the society, no problem. So the people opened up their gates, because most of the cities were walled cities. They opened up their gates until the whole of Portugal and Spain came under the rule of Muslims within a short period of time. And for 40 years, people lived under a rule that they never knew before. Complete freedom. But the thing that was missing within their society is that they needed a central leader. They needed somebody who was an example for them. And that was missing. And by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and a major political change that happened in the Muslim world, in 755, Abdurrahman ibn Muawiyah, rahimahullah, another great leader, who you should not forget his name. You need to go back and study this man. Very important person. He was the last of the Umayyad dynasty. There was a great political struggle going on. The Abbasid dynasty overthrew the Umayyads. And the last of the Umayyads escaped from Iraq, and he came across into Egypt and into North Africa. And what was different about him, or what was strategic about Abdurrahman, is that his mother was Amazigh. His mother was a Berber from North Africa. So he had a tie with the people. And also he was the last of the Umayyads, and the Umayyads had established Islam there. Musa bin Nusayr was from the Umayyads. So the people recognized and loved the Umayyad rule. And Abdurrahman, it's a beautiful story of his life. You get a chance to read this in details. Abdurrahman fled across. He went to Qayrawan, that's where our scholars are. The scholars of Qayrawan told him, go into Al-Andalus, because they need a leader. So he went north into Al-Andalus, and he succeeded in uniting the people in the country. And his story is an amazing story that actually our leaders should study today. Because our problem is, after you have a revolution, now what do? Many of our countries, we are good creating chaos and fawda and whatnot, we do that. But after the revolution, now what's going to happen? How do you consolidate yourself? How do you implement Islam? That's where his life is a really important lesson for us, because he led by example. He didn't live in a palace. He lived a simple life. He used to pray with the Muslims. He would give sadaqah and go and make sure the people were okay. He would even give the Jummah khutbah on some occasions. And he took care of the poor in the society. He immediately established education for all children. Now see, this is a leader now. He's not chopping heads or hands off, or say this is Sharia. Right? This is a wrong concept. The penal laws come in later, after you established a society, educated the people, and they love Islam. Then you institute the penal laws. Because if you institute it too early, there may be oppression in the land, and there may be people who shouldn't be punished. So what he did was he worked in stages, right? It's an example for us. He first established education. He did not force Christians or Jews to be Muslim. Every child could learn reading, writing, arithmetic. Higher studies were in Arabic, Islamic studies. Okay, he encouraged agriculture. He had experts come from across in North Africa, other parts of the world. He was so important that the Abbasids themselves, even though they wanted to attack him, but Al-Mansur, the leader of the Abbasids, he said, leave this man who was Saqa Quraysh. He is the falcon of Quraysh. Leave this man alone. That's how he's known, as the falcon of Quraysh. And Abdurrahman Rahimahullah, he brought in agriculture. And one important move he made was water. He rebuilt the Roman aqueducts, and he established flowing water all over the place. Water is tahara. When you have tahara, and you have a society like this, see, these are the basis of an Islamic society. This is what this man did. He planted citrus fruits. He planted dates, olives, many fruits, pomegranates, many things that are still flourishing today in that part of the world. If you travel through Spain, it's like mostly olives that are around you. He planted this. He encouraged business. Okay, so the society was flourishing. And then he made his capital to be the city of Cordoba. And Cordoba, in a strategic position in the country, along the Guadalquivir River, Wadi al-Kabir, Cordoba soon became the gem, not only of Al-Andalus, but the gem of the world. How is this possible? First, he established the religion. And instead of pushing out the Christians, he actually purchased the cathedral in Cordoba for 100,000 dinars. Now, 100,000 dinars in those days is a lot of money. That's a lot of money. It could be close to like, $50 million or something, like a huge amount of money. He purchased the cathedral. He widened it, brought in architects, and he and his predecessors worked on this masjid until it became the largest house of worship in Western Europe and maybe in the western part of the world. So he expanded now, Islam, and that was his base. And then he started to build in the society itself. And by the year 1000, this is after the time of Abdurrahman, some of his predecessors were there. By the year 1000, Cordoba was the largest city in the world. You remember the year 2000? In the year 2000, which was a critical point, in time, they did some studies. I read, I think it was Newsweek or Time magazine, did a study. What were the 10 largest cities in the world in the year 1000? Okay, and it's surprising that 6 of the 10 cities were Muslim places. Okay, and Cordoba was the largest city on earth at the time. #1 in the world. That's the level that they actually reached. And there they had 200,000 houses, 600 masjids, 50 hospitals, 900 public baths. It's amazing. And the streets were actually lit for 10 kilometers in any direction. streetlights. So the achievement they made in Cordoba was not done by Europe. It took Paris and London. It took them 700 years to actually achieve the same thing. So what they achieved in the year 1000 took Paris and London 700 years before they actually had flowing water, lit streets, hospitals. So this is an amazing achievement. Okay, and this, of course, this is a study in itself. But what is important for us is that this was a fresh start for Europe, really a fresh start for the world with this achievement that was made in this land. And that was the heights of Islamic civilization. But what happened, and it's a long study, what happened is the next generation was not as strong as the first one. So their leaders, Abdurrahman al-Nasir, he was a good leader, but he built a huge palace complex for himself. So he started wanting the dunya, right? Material things. So when material things start to set in to the mind, this is where corruption can come. And now you can see why the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, when the gold and silver used to come into the city, he would give it away until it was all given away, then he'd go to sleep. He did not want the dunya, right? And in authentic hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said, Inna li kulli umma fitna, wa fitna tu ummati al-mal. Every nation has a trial and test, and the trial and test of my nation is wealth. You see it up until today. We don't have enough money, or we have too much. So we're tried by this. And so when the Muslims now started to turn to the dunya, and the leaders started to turn to the dunya, they started to squabble and fight over power. Tribalism came in. Abandonment of the Sunnah. And when they left this, the Trinitarian forces started to return from the north. And they started to reconquer the area, section by section. And the worst possible thing that a Muslim leader could do was to turn against his own brother. There were 22 emirates, 22 different emirs after one, right? And even though Islam had been revived, it's a long story. It went up and it went down. But eventually, they started to really lose their territory. And when the forces started to come in, after this weakness set in on the Muslims, right? Abandoning Sunnah, squabbling over wealth, right? Overabundance. Now what happens is, according to some estimates, it is reported that somewhere around 2 million Jews were actually killed. 3 million Muslims were killed. Hundreds and thousands were driven out of their homes. And this continued. It continued, and the names which are important to us now in our study of deeper roots, Muslims in America, right? You have to get familiar with certain names. There's a general name that they would call anybody who was a Muslim. That is called the Moors. So they say Moorish architecture. Moors is from moros, which is a Latin word which means colored. Right? Somebody with dark skin or color in their skin. Colored people. Okay? And that's what they use if they want to dehumanize a population. They'll use color instead of their name or their tribe or their language. Right? So they use the word Moors for the general description. When the Muslims were conquered by the Christians, they still needed the Muslims for a while because we had all the skills. We were the tailors, the artisans, the scholars. We had all the skills. The Jews were the money lenders and, intellectuals, so they needed them as well. Okay, so they called the people mudajjar, which is like, they were like servile imposters, right? And they would put special uniforms on them. But they needed them for a period of time. The next phase that happened in their, wicked rule was when they got the skills from us, then they started what is called the Inquisition, where they want to get rid of everybody. So they say you have a choice. Either you become Catholic or we burn you at the stake. So those people who could not escape, could not fight back or could not escape, and had to accept Christianity openly but keep their religion, the Muslims were called Morescos. Remember that name, Morescos, right? And the Jews are called Morenos. So these are people who on the outside appear like Christians, but on the inside they're hiding their identity. Now this is an important concept for us because these are the people who actually came across with Columbus. These are the people in early America. It's part of our identity right here. We don't understand our history here. But these are the people now who came across on the boats, suffering first, special badges, separate facilities set up in the areas, difficult conditions. These were the Moresco people in the lands there of Islam. Of course, the Islamic response to this was to struggle. Either we would struggle, we would resist, this is the concept of jihad, which is resistance, or hijrah, or migration. That is the Islamic response. Those who could not struggle, and hold them off, had to resist. Okay, but during this Inquisition, which really came into effect around 1478, that's when they really organized it there. It got really bad in the lands. Because remember now, the third level was they drove Muslims out, forced them to accept Christianity. Even then, they were not satisfied with Muslims. They were not satisfied. Now imagine a person, for instance, is a case of a person who took a bath on Thursday night. A Christian, right? He took a bath on Thursday night, and when they heard about it, they burnt him alive. Why do you think they would punish a person who took a bath on Thursday night? Does anybody know? It's Laylatul Jumu'ah, right? Jumu'ah starts in the evening, right? After Maghrib, that's Jumu'ah. So the fact that he took a bath means some Islam left in him. That's enough for them to burn him alive. That's what happened in Spain. Okay, that was enough. There was a case, famous case of a woman named Elvira, a Christian, and Elvira, she didn't eat pork, and she changed her linens on Saturday. They burnt her alive. And they instituted the drinking of wine and the eating of pork in just about every single meal of the day. 3 meals a day. Wine, pork. You have to hang it from your shops. That's Spanish culture, right? They did that in order to weed out the Muslims who were living in this area. Okay? So this is the difficult situation we find ourselves in with the Muslims. We will take a break, inshallah, for Salatul Isha, and we'll come back after that, inshallah, wa billahi tawfiq. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.